I want to start a bit about your story. To tell me about how'd you get started? What's the kind of like the inception of what's been the kind of inception of your career?
Mhm. I've always been a tech guy and trained as an engineer, did my PhD at Stanford in electrical engineering, founded a medical imaging company right out of that research group, sold that to a public company. Um, I was VC funded, and I found the VC experience so jarring that I decided to bootstrap a second company, which I did. Um, I was the only funder of that company, sold that to a public company as well. And then I got the bug again for large scale and venture investments. And so founded a third company, which was funded by Sequoia, Kleiner Perkins, went on to become a public company. From there, I've been a limited partner in a bunch of VC funds and an angel investor for over 20 years.
Absolutely. I want to ask about the first thing you said. So you said you're building this startup out of Stanford and you were venture backed, and you said that that experience was jarring. Tell me about that. What what do you mean by jarring?
Um, I think at times the founders and the investors were not on the same boat. We were naive. We didn't know where we were getting ourselves in for. We had technology which was maybe 15 years too early. The investors were in a big hurry, and we were in a very difficult field, which is medical imaging, a very conservative area. So we were making a lot of progress, and actually the technology is in broad use today. But we didn't benefit financially from that effort.
If you could go back, what would you have done differently? How would you have handled those interactions with VCs differently?
Yeah, I would have relied more on strategic investors. Um, venture investors have a limited portfolio of perhaps 10 to 20 companies. They want one or two of those companies to do really well, and they're not really all that interested in every company doing well. As a founder, you have a portfolio of one company, and you want to maximize the chance that that company does well. So there, you already have a fundamental misalignment of interests. Venture capitalists are likely, if it's clear to them that you're not that one or two company that's going to really go to stardom, they're going to move on very quickly. You would prefer to keep chugging and make that company successful. So it's important to understand that possibility for misalignment going in.
If you're a young founder today and you're kind of having to pick someone, you mentioned you'd pick a strategic investor. What would that specifically look like? What would you be looking at for the investors that are giving you term sheets? How would you know if they're going to kind of be patient with you, or if they're going to push you and they're going to make life hell for you?
Venture investors have typically a 5-year outlook. They want to see regular refinancings because that jacks up the value that they can show on their books. They need to return capital to their investors in a reasonable amount of time. So in a field like medical imaging, I think those are tough bars to meet. I think that a strategic investor in that particular case would have a lot more patience, would be able to bring a lot of specific value to your sales and marketing. Channels are extremely conservative in that space. So I think that creates a greater alignment. Even if you have to effectively sell the company to that one investor, if you can write your term sheets in such a way that you're still open to offering shares on the market to their competitors, and you've limited the specific value that they're receiving, for example, that they have a 1-year head start on capitalizing any technology that you've provided. then I think, yeah, you and your funders are marching toward a common goal and
Like,
still giving you the independence that you need to do what's right for you.
absolutely.
But as you say, Burke, I've really been very, very lucky, and most of the most of the dice has rolled my way.
Now that you've kind of done it a few times, do you think how much of do you think building a successful startup is an art versus a science? Do you think it's like, if someone's got the right experience, they can just keep pumping out these startups? Or as you said, do you think a lot of it comes down to it's like an arts, comes down to luck, being at the right place at the right time?
It's luck and it's skill. Being at the right place at the right time with the right idea, uh, absolutely necessary. At the same time, once you've done this once or twice, you can identify the right time and the right market to be in. And so you know the right questions to ask. See, it really shifts the odds in your favor. So as a venture investor, an angel investor for some years, a founder, the kind of questions that run through my mind and that I would recommend to any of your founders to ask themselves is, who is my customer? What is the value proposition? How do I know? How have I tested my value proposition? It's one thing to have a narrative in one's own head. It's another thing to just humbly listen to the customer and ask them, where's your problem? What can I do to help you? If I were to do this, how excited would you be? And if there's a yawn in response, you've gotten your answer. So with the company that did go public, I recall that I sat on the street corner and gave out $5 bills to people who would sit down with me for a couple of minutes and answer my question. So it's not that difficult to find out what the customer's thinking and how excited they might be. And it's critical to ask because so many people just trust their hunch, and their hunch can certainly be wrong. Is it a worthy initiative? I think is an important question for founders to ask themselves. It certainly is for angel investors. So if you were to succeed at this, and aside from the monetary rewards, how does this advance the world? Is this really worth spending a good portion of one's life on? What is the potential market size? A lot of first-time founders underestimate the size of the business that might interest a venture investor. Is this the kind of business that can reach $200 million in revenue? If it's not, it's probably not going to be of interest to institutional investors. It may be of interest to one's friends. And so that requires a different funding model. What is the business model for this business? How is it going to make money? And then how much capital is required? There are some businesses that require an enormous amount of capital. Some require very little. So for example, I've invested in a hard cider company. This is an example of a business that requires a lot of capital, not so much for production, but for building a consumer brand. And I've also been an investor in a bunch of software businesses, which, if they serve a business customer, often require much more limited capital and can grow without the need for a lot of additional capital infusion. How do you reach the customer? What is your go-to-market strategy? Sometimes that's unrealistic or insufficiently thought through. Who's the competition? If I'm successful, I'm going to attract a lot of attention. Who will they be?
Absolutely. You mentioned the story of giving people $5 on the street, and giving it to anyone who would be willing to talk to you. Tell me about that story.
Yeah, that was a business to consumer business, ultimately selling to consumers. And so, yeah, you need to talk to your customer, find out, look at the size of the smile on his face when you tell him what product you're developing. Is this going to be a fantastic transition for him, or is it something that he can just shrug his shoulders about? Ultimately, we sold over 6 million pieces into that consumer market. And so I think those $5 interviews were well done. And in that case, it was a venture-backed company. We We chose them because of their competency, and in negotiations with them, um, we negotiated for a really low value coming for them to come in, a really low pre, and I think that was actually a good move on our part. Um, for us, we wanted our business to succeed, um, and it was really important for us to give them the incentive to put in that extra effort to make that succeed. And if they were going to see a one times or a two times or a five times return on their money, they probably wouldn't have been all that interested. But if we could shift the economics so that they could make 10 times or 20 times on their money, they actually made 30 times. They would work for us, and that would again further align our interests.
If you could take me back to that moment, sir, standing on the street, you're telling people you'll give them $5 to answer a few questions. What did you then do? Let's say they take the money. They're like, okay, cool. Let's do it. And so they agree to do the interview. What questions were you asking them? What was that conversation?
How painful is your current solution? Um, would you be willing to pay $150 for what we had in mind? Um, how do you learn about new products? What goes into your decision making process? Um, how often do you do the types of activities that our solution lubricated? Those types of questions. And then we were able to use the answers in discussions with our potential investors.
What was the product you were kind of developing these for at the time? You mentioned it's a B2C company. It was venture backed. What kind of problem? What was the thesis you were trying to validate?
Yeah, this was really, really early in the personal computer market and had to do with communications, connecting to what was then bulletin boards, um, and sending faxes. And it was awkward for non-technical people back then. They were creating a lot of content on their new personal computers, and often they were printing it out on a printer and then posting it in the U.S. mail. So we were early companies in making communication really a part of the personal computing experience. This was before internet, and in our small way, we helped push that movement along.
I always love to talk to investors about some of their portfolio companies. I always love a good portfolio story. Uh, Out of all the deals you've gone to analyze and invest in, who are maybe a few or maybe just one particular founder that really stood out to you and why?
There have been so many. I think that one business that I ended up losing a lot of money on. I have a closet full of $25,000 T-shirts. Um, they had correctly identified a huge market. They had defensible technology. This was a business in the very early days to provide um, automated telephone systems um, for handling incoming phone calls. We've all experienced those systems now, where you can converse with an automated attendant and get the information that you need. Perhaps you're booking air travel or talking to your bank. Um, it's come on even to excess, but it's a big factor in everyone's lives now. The speech recognition abilities. This was a company out of Canada who were doing a great job, and they failed miserably, um, primarily because of weaknesses on go-to-market and and competition, which was stronger than they initially had figured. So the stars have to line up.
You mentioned that with your third startup, you actually had the backing of a few very elite VCs, including Sequoia. Which, if you've got Sequoia in your cap table, you kind of set. Now your life is much easier. Obviously, there's the factor of being a third time founder, basically. But what are some other things that enabled you to attract such elite VCs to invest in you?
I pitched Sequoia early, and they respectfully declined, but we remained on good terms, and that gave me an opportunity uh, to show them how I was able to execute on the plan. And so I was able to fund the company through friends and angels for a year, go back to Sequoia and say, look, this is what I told you a year ago. This is what I've done. And here's the product. And this is what customers are saying about it. That gave me a lot of credibility. And they were able to close within a week.
Oh, so the kind of, I guess, underlying lesson there is even if at first, they don't want to invest, keep that relationship going, keep that channel open, keep them updated, show them that you've got a high bias towards action. Maybe they gave you a bit of feedback, you apply that, you tell them how it went, and that shows that you're kind of that because you kept that channel open, that was one of the reasons you got Sequoia. Am I kind of correct in my observation there?
That's right. Yeah, use that as an opportunity to show them that you can actually execute. Come back with always positive surprises. I told you this. It was actually much, much bigger.
Interesting. Well, Len, that's it for the questions I've got. Is there anything that you'd like to, any stories you'd like to tell, any lessons you'd like to talk about?
Mm. It's a huge thrill to run a company, and uh, so much depends upon the team and keeping the team involved and happy and bringing the right people. I think that's the greatest satisfaction of starting a company is um, is developing the people along the way. At the same time, people can be the biggest headache, and so don't underestimate the effort that you have to put into to both recruit, but then also to make for a smoothly running team. Ultimately,
Yeah.
that's the asset. Mhm.
You mentioned a big part of building a successful company is having the right people around you. Who would you say were some of the best people that you kind of work with back in the day that really enabled your success, and what maybe lessons did you pick up from how they did things?
Always under promise, over deliver. Um, surprise your customer with goodwill. We would pack our products with coupons, um, which would result in a donation being given to one of three select charities, and the customer could choose which one, just to build goodwill and to make sure that the product was registered at the end of the day.